Everything's a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, copy. Deja vu.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Deja Reviewed podcast, where we talk about the original versions of TV shows that were later rebooted. For season 1, we're discussing The Twilight Zone. I'm Michael.
And I'm Mark.
And today we're talking about season 1, episode 27, titled The Big Tall Wish. And The Big Tall Wish originally aired on April 8th, 1960. It was directed by Ron Winston as Ronald Winston. I love how they clarify that. It was written by Rod Serling, and it starred Rod Serling, Ivan Dixon, and Stephen Perry.
There is a fifth dimension.
Both shadow and substance of things and
suddenly up ahead.
Just cross over. You're moving into a land, another dimension.
Next stop, the Twilight Zone.
Okay, here's Rod Serling's opening voiceover from The Big Tall Wish. In this corner of the universe, a prize fighter named Boley Jackson, 183 pounds and an hour and a half away from a comeback at St. Nick's Arena. Mr. Boley Jackson, who, by the standards of his profession, is an aging, over-the-hill relic of what was, and who now sees a reflection of himself who's left too many pieces of his youth in too many stadiums for too many years before too many screaming people. Mr. Boley Jackson, who might do well to look for some gentle magic in the hard-surfaced glass that stares back at him.
And from IMDb, the description is: an aging boxer finds himself the winner of a match he thought he had lost, the result of a 6-year-old's frantic wish. But can a world-weary, embittered man still believe in miracles? Or will he turn his back on it? I would assume that should have been on them, on miracles.
Yeah.
And he does.
That's not a bad summary.
No.
2 quick questions before we move on from you listing the credits. One, I recognize the name Ron Winston, but as is my wont, did not do any homework and see what other episodes had he directed.
Yes, The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, which I was very surprised to look that up, because I was a big fan of Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, not a big fan of The Big Tall Wish, but we'll get to that.
And the Stephen Perry, I just wanted to clarify, is not the Stephen Perry of Journey. We assume. Do we know?
It is not the Stephen Perry of Journey, because one of the things that was very cool I thought about this episode is that it was a nearly entirely all black cast in 1960 time, which was revolutionary enough for the Twilight Zone to get, I wrote this down. They got the 1961 Unity Award for Outstanding Contributions to Better Race Relations. So that was very revolutionary.
For this episode in particular, or just in general as a show? You know,
I think I'm sure it's basically for this episode in particular, because I doubt there were many. Well, we'll see. I don't know if there were many more, but if it was awarded in 1961, I mean, it would have been post this season. Yeah. So this probably is the episode though that they pointed to, because I'm sure that this was very, very out in left field to see an almost entirely black cast in this. An almost entirely black cast, and then a guy who looked exactly like Willem Dafoe in Boley's Trainer.
We need to get to that guy later, because I have some thoughts about him.
Fair enough.
But I did think that was worth noting. You know, it's one of the first things. The first shot of a character other than a couple, there's like a billboard shot, or not billboard, like a flyer, and then a shot of a homeless guy sleeping under a newspaper. And then Boley Jackson, I'm like, oh, I think this is the first non-Caucasian major character we've seen.
Oh, definitely.
Which, is a little I don't want to say unusual, because I think this is one, we've talked about the gender issues, and where it really seemed like even for 1960, this show was behind the times. And this is something where I think it's really important to have some context. The note that it got that award for better race relations is, I think, really useful. And also think like 1960, we're right in the early era of the civil rights movement. There's kind of sit-ins going on at this point in Freedom Ride. So this is very much in the popular culture, but this is before Selma, before I Have a Dream, before the sort of really big moments of the civil rights movement taking off in the sort of, as we think of it now in hindsight. So the other thing I thought was interesting here is I imagine there may have been, some shows that had like black characters in them, But as you said, to have sort of the entire cast of this episode and then also that it's a show that an anthology series. And so, it's a show where people are used to tuning in and seeing the white actors and then tune into this episode and it's an all black cast. And that I imagine has a very different impact than something where, maybe there always was this one black actor in this show, or even if there was a show, I don't know my TV history. I probably should, that had an all black cast at that point, but you tuned in every week and saw them. this would be probably a surprise for some people when they turn it on and, see actors of a different race there.
And I want to get all of this out now because I don't want my dislike of this particular episode to cloud how important it was really how important that this was. And for as much of a shithead as Bill Cosby turned out to be, what was kind of cool about the Cosby Show and what I thought was cool about this episode is it didn't matter that they were black. I mean, they could have done this exact same thing with white actors, and that's what was kind of cool about the Cosby Show. It was not leaning into the fact that they're black and having it be a comment about that. It was just black actors playing just normal that's a horrible way of saying it, but roles that had traditionally gone to white actors and actresses were just given to black actors and actresses in this, and it could have been played exactly the same way with an all-white cast. And I thought it was a neat choice of Serling, and obviously a very progressive. We've given Serling all the kudos we possibly can of how progressive he was throughout most of the Twilight Zone, other than a lot of gender relations. And this was a very neat and clearly a very bold choice, considering the series won an award for it, ostensibly.
Yeah, and I think bringing up the Cosby Show is an interesting corollary, looking where we were 20 years later in the 80s, because I think you're right that these are both this episode versus that show, if I'm trying to be sort of precise about it, where, the actors in the family could have been of any race, and in this case, I think everything would have still played out the same. In the Cosby Show, most of the stuff would have played out the same. There's times where racial issues come up on there. The difference in the Cosby Show 20 years later is you have him as a doctor and his wife as a lawyer. True. And so the sort of African-American professional class. And I did think it was interesting here, and maybe, and this is one of the things, I was pretty critical of the gender issues in some of the past episodes, and I think likely will continue to be based on their track record. Sure. But, I did note that, okay, he's playing a boxer, and we've seen a lot of characters in the Twilight Zone who are scientists, astronauts, doctors, businessmen, and so they have the first time they have a black actor in the lead, they're playing a boxer, a sort of physical, don't necessarily need a lot of brains or intelligence to do it, which I think is a little bit of stereotyping, but also this is one where I'm willing to say, like, look, for 1960, if this is kind of like as progressive as they could get, or that they thought people were going to be willing to accept or whatever. And I do think it's worth noting his opponent, the other boxer he fights, is white, and his last name is like Consiglio or something Italian, like that. And it's Italian, which also at this time I think would have been kind of a, lower class, looked down on sort of immigrant group relative to some, other Europeans. So even that I thought was interesting, playing with a little bit of the class dynamic there too. I
did have the exact same note on that. It's a shame that it wasn't as progressive as it could have been, because something is fluttering in the back of my mind about this exact thing, that of the black actor getting cast for the role, like you said, the sort of lesser, the blue collar, the lesser intelligent role. At least they did have some other characters in there that were just, of course, we didn't get any background on any of them, but it was neat. And I made a note of this too. Everyone knew kind of where he was, where he lived. He just sort of knew the neighborhood too. Mm-hmm. And at least he did. So Bully Jackson, this was his comeback, his attempted comeback, fighting this other boxer. And so it did seem that he at least was kind of at the height of a boxer of at the time, and this superstar sort of athlete. they gave him at least that, but I did make the same note that it was still a little problematic.
Yeah, it still is. Although, like I would say, I think being aware of kind of where things were in the 1960s, and the fact that even doing that still won an award tells you kind of maybe what would have been acceptable or not. On the other hand, Serling probably, I have the sense, had a pretty firm hand and some autonomy in what he was doing with the show. And I can imagine, like, if he would have said, okay, this astronaut's black, I imagine he could have done that. He would have had the power to. Maybe not. I'm not sure what the studio, how much power the studio had and sort of details like that. But, the other thing I do want to say is, even though he was in this profession that is sort of using your body rather than your mind, what I did like is he was a very self-aware, thoughtful character. I mean, he had some great, really interesting lines and takes on things, and particularly in the first half of the episode, which I thought was stronger than the second half, like when he's doing some sort of self-analysis and talking to the kid. I mean, he's a very thoughtful, intelligent person. And so I also think that's something that we might take for granted now, but may have been progressive at that point in terms of how they were portraying him. Wasn't just like the dumb meathead fighter, like, just tell me who to go hit or something,
For sure. And on the flip side of what you're saying about the studio, at this, on the same token, and I'll give the reason I'm giving Serling more credit is the fact that he cast, maybe not that he cast this character as a black character, but the fact that he could have avoided any whiff of controversy, I'm sure, if there was any, and avoided it entirely just by casting this with an all-white cast and had the same story to tell. So it was,
for
at
sure.
least progressive.
That's a really good
that
point.
way.
And we did see a fighter in a previous episode. The Four of Us Are Dying had a
that's
prize
right.
fighter as one of the people he turns into, who was also white. So
That's right.
Again, that could have been done that way as well.
And along there, your comments about he was definitely like this. And I thought the look for Ivan Dixon, is who played Bully Jackson. They picked a perfect looking character, that just this sort of brutish but kind of gentle. I think they were probably modeling him a little bit after Muhammad Ali. I should have looked up and seen when Muhammad Ali was actually fighting, but that was the impression I got from Bully Jackson's character, was this sort of gentle giant that was a stud in the ring, but like you said, was more of a poet outside the ring. And he did have some kind moments, clearly, with Henry was the kid that made the wish, and Henry's mother, I forget her name, but he did have actually some kind moments, and people in the neighborhood seemed to love him and respect him. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, and I think he was well cast to, like, sad to say, to look like the sort of getting over the hill boxer, because when are you done as a boxer? I don't know, 25 or something.
Yeah.
Like, he was not old in any stretch of the imagination, but had the look of somebody who was still in good shape, but was maybe like he was not the sort of,
he was a dad bod.
Ivan Drago, like, muscle bound big fighter in his prime. He was like a little bit past that, but still, athletic. And there's a line in the opening voiceover we read, which said, by his standards of his profession, is an aging over the hill relic of what was. I really liked that line, and particularly the phrase, like, by the standards of his profession, because it's such an interesting thing about sort of sports in general, that you're, depending on the sport, your period where you can really be super successful and be a star can be very short. I mean, if you're like a gymnast, it might be while you're in your teens, and by the time you hit 20, you're over the hill. I guess if you're doing something that, doesn't require a whole lot of physical exertion like golf, you can play into like your 70s, but not knocking golf.
Well, and also not even just the sport, but even within the sport. If you're a running back in the NFL and you make it to your 30s,
right,
you're going to, and then Tom Brady is our age and he's still playing at a high level.
Even that, think of how unusual that is. And like everyone talks about, like, wow, he's still playing like at such an old age, and he's early 40s,
Yeah, true.
And I was thinking about this in the current context with the pandemic, and I know there's been a lot of discussion about when or if sports leagues are going to come back. And I was talking with a friend the other day about the NFL in particular. We're both football fans, and what was going to happen with that. And I really see the dilemma for some of the players. Like, look, if you're Tom Brady or another like super well paid star, you're like, I don't really want to risk getting sick and coming back. I've already made tens of millions of dollars.
Sure.
But if you're a guy on the bottom of the roster and maybe in one of these positions that has a shorter lifespan, like a running back, for instance, I could see that being a real concern. If you're trying to like feed your family and you haven't banked millions of dollars, maybe you're in your first or second year, or you've been a bottom of the roster guy and kind of making minimum salary for a couple of years, and you know you only have a few good years in you, like, yes, taking a year off of, you know, the hits and the injuries and stuff might extend you a little bit, but it's not going to turn back father time. You're still getting older by a year. And if you know, I think the average NFL career is like 3 years. You know, you imagine if this takes one of those years away from you, that's a really rough calculation in terms of, do I take the risk of getting sick, but be able to get this payday for one of the few years I'll be able to do it, or not?
Well, and that's a good segue into, before Boley's fight, ostensibly a mobster, I guess, comes in and offers. Okay,
yeah. Who was, so the guy was Thomas, and I would love some explanation of what he was, because he said like he hired him for the night, but then he doesn't help him, and he's trying to recruit. If you can explain what that guy was doing, you're a better man than I.
Well, I am a worse man than you, because I have no idea. So I took him as being some sort of mobster, that he was obviously had bet on the fight, because that pissed Boley off. Boley takes a swing at him in one of the worst cuts I've ever seen in the Twilight Zone, and breaks his right hand right before the fight, because the mobster dodges him. No one tries to stop him. He just runs out of the room, and Boley breaks his hand on the wall. And of course,
I didn't even see him run out of the room. I actually had to like stop and rewind for a second, because I thought maybe that was like the Twilight Zone twist, as he goes to take a swing at the guy and the guy just vanishes. I was like, maybe the guy wasn't there.
Oh, that would have been much better than what this actual episode was about. But yeah,
no, it was super confusing. What the hell happened there?
Yeah. So, but I took him as a mob guy that was fixing fights, because he offers Boley the opportunity. And frankly, if I were Boley, I would have taken it. He's like, if you can just survive a couple rounds in the ring, you'll get paid for it, and you'll be one of those guys that just consistently works, and just works 2 rounds and takes a dive. And
I didn't necessarily think he was like, okay, he clearly was a shady guy, so I'm not arguing that. I wasn't sure he was a mobster. I was thinking maybe just like a really low end promoter manager, like, yeah, who's like, look, there's going to be, you know, every night, every time there's a fight, there's like the headline, and we need like 6 undercards, and I'm one of the guys who's just going to have several fighters in my stable who can go be on one of those undercard fights, and will guarantee they're good for a couple rounds. And not necessarily, I didn't get the sense necessarily that they have to throw the fight or he's a fixer, but just like, he's going to promise that, yes, my fighters will show up and they'll be able to survive at least 2 rounds, and maybe they'll win sometimes and maybe they'll lose, but you know, they're never going to be on the main card. And he doesn't care if they win or lose. They're just getting a paycheck by showing up and, you know, taking hits for a couple of rounds.
I might have read into that because of the betting, but that makes, if that wasn't the case, that makes the betting angle solely so Boley takes a swing at him and breaks his hand before this match, in my opinion.
And that's partly why I think I thought it was that. But I still don't get what Boley had hired him for, because if he's like a manager, promoter or something, but he said like, you know, you got me for, you know, you paid for me for the night, and he makes this joke about like, you bought the cigar with me, when Boley, in the first time we've seen in 27 episodes of everyone smoking all the time, somebody actually says like, stop blowing smoke in my face.
Yeah, true.
Which in his defense, like, A, he's right, you shouldn't do that, and B, he was like literally about to go out to a fight. But based on what we've seen up to this point in the Twilight Zone, it would not have surprised me if he's in the back room like having a smoke before he goes out to fight too.
Yeah, so. True. So speaking of breaking his hand, he ends up, quote unquote, losing this match to the Italian boxer, and Henry essentially is pressing his head up against the TV and wishes away this loss, and then Boley ends up winning because Henry's made this wish. But because because Boley can't believe in the wish, it gets unwound and he ends up losing. Right?
You have correctly summarized what happens.
Okay.
Yes.
So the broken hand was probably unnecessary. I think the only thing that the broken hand added, because Henry had wished that First of all, I was confused about this. Henry told Boley that he wished before the fight that he wouldn't get hurt. He had nothing to worry about because he wouldn't
And he
get
said
hurt.
he made the big tall wish then. Yes.
Right.
So I was also confused because his first big tall wish didn't apparently have any impact, but then when he did it again, it did.
Right. Yeah, because Boley goes out and gets his ass kicked, and he's not even trying to defend himself in the fight footage that we actually see. This other guy is just roundhouse lefts and rights, and it was painful to watch, almost as painful to watch as the montage of people watching the fight, which I don't know if it bothered you as much as it bothered me, but there's just like shots of people watching the fight, and they're just like hand wringing. One woman's like holding her hands over her face. The fight,
Two different women were holding
true.
their hands over their face.
The fight announcer's like twisting the microphone. It was just a bunch of hand wringing, and it was so, except for the one guy that's picking his teeth with a toothpick, and it was. There were a lot of, considering this same director did The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, there were a lot of weird choices in this episode, I thought.
Well, I think so. It was badly done and cheesy. I'm not going to argue that in any way, shape, or form. I basically thought what they were doing was they didn't have enough or possibly any extras, and they're trying to stage a fight scene. And so I was imagining that, like, so this is one of the things you get these like tight little close-ups where you can't see anything else around them, so you can't tell that there's not a big crowd. And by just getting like the close-ups of the hands or the mouth or whatever, we never sort of get faces or whole bodies. You could just have like two extras. You swap out a couple of costumes on them, swap out the gloves on the woman who's holding her hands in front of her face, and it looks like a different person. So it looked like a bunch.
That's true. That could be true.
So anyway, I think that was just their way of sort of faking a big crowd, and then you add the sort of crowd sound effect under it, and you kind of get that effect. You know, the camera work during the fight scene, I totally agree, he was not like defending himself at all. And it was reminding me of Raging Bull. I think probably because it was a boxing movie, black and white, and I am in no way comparing the camera work in this to the camera work in Raging Bull, which is amazing. I was thinking of the scene.
I'm going to edit this so it says that you are specifically comparing the camera work in this to the camera work in Raging Bull.
It's like edited like Raging Bull is not as good as the Twilight Zone.
Sweet can.
That was a Simpsons reference for those who didn't get that.
Yes, it was. Gummy Venus Divine.
But it reminded me of the scene where Jake LaMotta is just like laying against the ropes, getting just wailed on and not even trying to defend himself. He's like, come on, give me all you got. And so it had a little bit of that feel. I think probably the black and white being part of it. But I did like a way that it sort of cut back and forth between the fight and then Henry and his mother watching the fight, and then a back and forth between those. And then there's like a nice POV shot from Boley's perspective, like looking up at the ref with the light behind him as once he's down on the ground, they start counting him down. So I thought there were some neat bits in terms of just how they, the production aspect of the actual fight. The crowd stuff was super cheesy.
I had that exact same note about the POV shot, because it was even cooler than that, because they actually show him as he's going down, sort of swooning and falling backwards. And then, he lands on his back and he's looking up at the bright light with the ref counting him out over him.
And then they do have another shot from like behind his head while he's on the ground looking up at the ref, which if you think about is you actually have to do some work to fake. So you kind of need to get him up like on a glass platform that you can get the camera underneath to like shoot up through him.
Yes, they did. And you could see his head like pushed up against the glass on it. It was neat, but it was a good effect. I agree.
I think you mean pushed up against the floor of the ring.
Right, exactly.
Or the mat, whatever.
I suspend my disbelief. So speaking of those shots of Henry and his mom watching the fight, Henry, he's a kid. He's a child actor. He's probably 7, 8 years old, something, playing a 6-year-old, I think. Was a very creepy actor, because he's like leaning up. He's almost like chanting at the TV screen about this wish. And there were just very dramatic moments with Henry way over melodramatizing his role in this. And I get he's a child actor and he's better than a lot of actors, frankly, we've seen in the Twilight Zone so far. But
and also the material he was given to work with. There was a great line from Boley when he's talking to the mom. He said like, Henry talks like a little old man, because he does.
Yes,
like the
true.
dialogue they gave him, you know, you basically need to be like Haley Joel Osment as a kid or Macaulay Culkin as a kid level acting to even try to pull that off reasonably.
So let's take a quick break, and then you want to talk about Boley's trainer Joe and how he looks like Willem Dafoe or some other things about him.
I think we have all sorts of things we could talk about. So let's come back after the break and see what we have left.
Okay, we are back. And I had mentioned early in this episode, Mark, how much Boley's trainer Joe looks like Willem Dafoe. And over the break, we were talking a little bit about that. What were your thoughts on old Joe?
So he does look like, I'm so glad you said you also thought he looked like Willem Dafoe, because if you said he looked like somebody else, I don't know who it could be.
The Green Goblin?
The thing I thought of it is weird is like Willem Dafoe has he has a weird look to him. He just kind of always has, and I love him as an actor. I think he's great, but it's like a very distinctive look, and and this guy looks like a weird Willem Dafoe. Sorry.
That's okay.
And the closest analogy I could make was I was thinking back to, because he's like a really like wrinkled prune face version of Willem Dafoe, and I was thinking of the scene in. I was not thinking of Prune Face from Dick Tracy, although now I am. But I was thinking of the scene in Revenge of the Sith, the third Star Wars prequel, when the Emperor Palpatine gets his like evil Sith lightning bolts turned back on himself, and it like wrinkles and, you know, disfigures his face. And it looked like Willem Dafoe if he had gotten hit by those lightning bolts in the same way. That was my take on the trainer.
And Willem Dafoe to me, or this guy to me...
Also been shrunk because this guy's like 4 feet tall.
Willem Dafoe to me, or this guy to me, looks like a real-life version of the Grinch Who Stole Christmas. They have that just sort of like... It looks like if they started smiling, they might never stop. Like the smile might just never stop growing up the sides of their face, is how I feel about the two of them.
Oh, that's a good analogy, because or a good comparison, because the part at the end after the fight when Joe's in there with him and he gives a big smile at him and it's like creepy. It like covers half his face.
Yeah. Speaking of creepy, did you think it was a little bit creepy early on in the episode when Boley is talking to Henry's mom and they're standing at their mailboxes and all of a sudden he like slams the mailbox and starts like tracing his finger down the mailbox and waxing philosophical about being an old boxer and how the world beats you down? I thought it was very weird, and I would have run if I were her.
You know, I'll say I really dug that. The thing I liked about this episode, because the sort of central Twilight Zone element of it was cheesy and didn't really work, and I'm sure we'll you already kind of covered most of that. Like, the kid makes a wish, and then Boley doesn't believe in it, unwishes. And there's all sorts of weird plot holes about he makes the wish twice, and the mom has this backstory about like, oh yeah, he made the big tall wish and then I like got the $15 for rent, but she didn't believe it was magic either. So that should have also been I don't know. That whole thing was weird. I really liked Boley. I liked the actor. We talked about him being well cast, but I thought he did a really good job with the material. I liked the writing of his lines. You know, there's the kind of opening scene with him. He's staring into a mirror because it's Twilight Zone, so we had to have a mirror. Yeah. And talking, although they use it well, because like he's kind of delivering, or it's during the opening voiceover, he's just kind of staring at himself before he starts talking, and then the camera kind of moves over and you see the reflection and see that the kid's in there with him, and that's where we introduce Henry. But he has a couple of lines like, a fighter don't need a scrapbook, Henry. You want to know what he's done, where he's fought? You read it in his face. He's got the whole story cut into his flesh. And he like starts going through his scars and injuries and like where they all happen. And then he describes himself and says, I'm a tired old man trying to catch a bus, and the bus is already gone, left a couple years ago. Arms heavy, legs like rubber, short of wind, one eye almost gone, and there I go running down the street trying to catch that bus to glory. I really wanted this to not be a Twilight Zone. Like there's this character, this like beaten down boxer who knows he's over the hill, but like, and knows he should give up, but like can't let go, trying to catch that brass ring or the one more shot at stardom. Like there's a really interesting drama in here with him, and I wanted it to just be that. And then they try to do this whole wish thing, which was just far less interesting than I think the actual story of Boley's life would have been. So he was the thing I really liked about it.
That's funny you say that, because that's one of my knocks on when we get to rating this episode. This was basically not a Twilight Zone episode, but you made me think of a couple things. One, I agree. I agree that he did a good job. Ivan Dixon did a good job. And for the most part, I thought the makeup they gave, the scars and stuff they gave him, it was so hit and miss. Sometimes it looked great. And like usually when he was like face on into the camera, I feel like it looked a lot better. And when it was, he was sort of off center or like not looking directly into the camera or not facing directly into the camera, it just didn't look as good. But he did have some absolutely great lines.
That's a really, really precise description. I think you're dead on. And it was almost like the makeup person was like just looking at him straight on the whole time they were doing it, made sure it looked good
point.
and like never went over to this. Because you could see like the outlines of where they pasted on the scars anytime they were at an angle. I think you're dead on with that. You know who he reminded me of in kind of that. And then you were talking about like when the him kind of hitting the mailbox. And the reason that kind of worked for me was I felt like I got him, and he's kind of like frustrated with himself of like, why am I still trying to do this? I know I shouldn't, but I'm doing it anyway. And we know he has a good heart because what he's been doing, you know, basically being like a big brother to Henry, who seems like maybe he has an absent father is the implication. They don't explicitly say it. But what he reminded me of in some of that early stuff is the vibe of Butch from Pulp Fiction, Bruce Willis's character. And you remember the scene where it's just a shot of him and Marcellus Wallace is off screen talking to him and telling him he's like over the hill and you had your chance and you got close and you never quite made it. And, you know, now I own you and you're going to take a dive in the fifth. And it's just Bruce Willis like staring at him, you know, staring at the camera kind of, or staring just off camera and listening to this. And then they're like, I go down in the fifth. Okay.
Your ass goes down in the fifth, I believe.
My ass goes down in the fifth.
Yeah, that's a good call. I didn't think about that. That's a good call.
But I got that same kind of vibe of somebody who kind of knows they're over the hill, but thinks they have like one more in them, which Bruce Willis, it turns out, does. And I think Boley believed he does, but they both know they're like, they're never going to reach the pinnacle. They're never going to be the champion at this point. They had their opportunity and missed it.
So you're walking right into my domain, which is old men playing sports movies. And so the two that's a great pull, Pulp Fiction. I didn't even think about that because essentially Boley is Butch from Pulp Fiction, and because Butch was having his one fight. Yeah, that's a great call there. The two movies that stood out for me, of course, are both baseball movies. The Rookie, which I think is one of the most underrated baseball movies of all time, and it's based on a true story. It's a Disney movie. Dennis Quaid and maybe I like this because I used to teach science, but he's a lefty. He's an old left-handed, 40-year-old left-handed science teacher who's coaching the baseball team, and he's realizing he's still throwing like 100 miles an hour, or he actually had surgery and is throwing harder than he used to throw in college. So the kids talk him into going out for a team. He makes the Tampa Bay Devil Rays at the time, Rays now, and has this great moment where he actually gets to pitch in the major leagues at like in his 40s. So really
it's
cool.
a true story. Yeah,
it is. Yeah.
I would just say, I think I would push back on you saying that's underrated, because like any list of the best baseball movies, I always see that on there. Like I think people have a lot of respect for that movie.
Okay. So yes, they do have a lot of respect, but I feel like people over respect Field of Dreams and The Natural, which are both good movies, but if you made me sit down and watch one of those three movies, I would pick The Rookie, because The Natural and Field of Dreams, granted, I've probably seen them 10 times as many times, are a little bit slow and a little bit boring. Whereas The Rookie has some great, it's that Disney knows how to wrest those emotions out of you.
And I would say The Natural, I've never particularly liked. Like, I've just never found it that interesting. Field of Dreams, I like a lot. As soon as you say The Rookie, the thing that I just remember out of that's just so good, and it's totally unrealistic, but like a great movie moment, is when they have the like automated speed meter, out on the road to show your speed if you're speeding, goes out and like throws. And he's like throwing past it, and of course it wouldn't actually register a ball, but it does. And it comes up, and I forget what the number is, but it like comes up and says like
something, I think.
Yeah, like 75 or something, and he like walks past it to go retrieve the ball, and after he walks past it, like flickers, and you saw like just one of the lights was kind of out, and actually was 95.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
It was such a nice, great visual.
Great visual, but the greatest moment in The Rookie is when he calls his kid to tell him that he's gonna go play for the Devil Rays after all that time, and So, well, he calls his wife and he tells her, and she, of course, bursts into tears. And he's like, okay, I got to go. I got to catch a bus. She's like, hang on. She's like, you got one more person to tell. She calls the kids at the phone, and Dennis Quaid I love Dennis Quaid. Dennis Quaid acts the shit out of this and is just like crying his eyes out on the other side or trying to hold it together on the other side of the phone. And he's like, I'm going to play for the Devil Rays. And the kid's like, cool. What's a Devil Ray? And he's like, it's like a fish. It's a really, really neat movie.
My favorite line from that movie is when he's out at like the open tryouts for, where there's like major league scouts there, and they keep making him throw. And afterwards, one of the scouts comes up and is like, you're making this hard on me. He's like, I go back there and I tell him I got like a 40-year-old pitcher I want to bring in, and they're going to laugh me out of the room. But if I don't tell them I found a prospect throwing 90 miles an hour, I'm going to lose my job.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
exactly.
I love that.
It's such a great movie. The other one that this is probably actually more apt that reminded me of is For the Love of the Game with Kevin Costner. And that was the one where he ends up, worked out a little bit better for Costner's character, but he's an over the hill, formerly great pitcher that ends up throwing a perfect game with the Tigers in Yankee Stadium on his last game before retirement. And it's a good one. It's a really good movie. That was maybe a little bit more apt. And one of the things, though, that kind of bothered me about the conclusion of this one is that it would have been a neat story if he had actually defeated him, or if he had actually... It kind of bugged me that Boley not only didn't have that last burst in him to fight with this broken hand, which would have been this heroic story, then he couldn't even believe in it enough to wish his way into this thing happening. And it was kind of more of just a sad ending for this character that could have been a better ending, I think, for Boley, that I think got a little bit cheated out of.
Yeah. Before you leave For the Love of the Game, I just want to comment on, I actually was not a huge fan of that movie. I found it pretty paint by the numbers and not terribly interesting, but the thing that has always stuck in my head since I saw it that I really love is the sort of film technique they use when Costner's on the mound and he's, like the crowd yelling at him and everything. And he's like, get into the zone, clear the mechanism. And like everything else just gets blurred out and the sound fades away. Yes. And it's just like, you really got the idea of the pitcher, like really tuning everything else out visually and sonically and just focuses in on the catcher and the batter. And like, this is the pitch I got to make. I really loved that device. To the other thing you're talking about, I agree with you. I feel like Boley kind of got a bad rap here. I thought the last scene on the roof with it's not the last scene, but the scene on the roof with Henry and Boley where, the kids telling Boley, you got to believe. If you don't believe, Boley, it won't be true. That's the way magic works. Okay, you got to set that up earlier. If that's the core conceit of this, you're like, the kid needs to say that before, like, I'm going to make the wish, but you have to believe or the wish won't come true. You can't bring it in after the fact and then make things get undone, just from like a screenwriting perspective. But then I think what they were going for was that at that latter part was that Boley really wanted to believe he had it in him to do it one more time, like I was talking about earlier. And the kid's like taking that away from him by saying, no, it was this wish. This was what did it. And he doesn't want to believe in the magics. That means it wasn't him. And there's something really interesting in that, because we've seen Boley as a nice guy who's really taking this kid under his wing, but also really in several moments, he's kind of worried about the kid, like being naive or not kind of understanding how the world works. And you kind of see this, you see the glimpses of what in a fully fleshed out drama where they didn't try to do this weird twist would have been like this tension between him wanting the kid to maintain his innocence and his childhoodness, but also like not get run over by the world and have some sense of reality. And I don't think they had the time or space in here to do that. And I don't think the writing like did what it needed to do that. I think they had deeper characters. They had the potential for deeper characters and like glimpses of that, but then they really like just kind of missed the boat on some of the emotional beats and on trying to kind of shoehorn in this magic plot device thing. And that I thought just never really quite worked.
Yeah. And it's probably because it is shoehorned in, but yeah, I didn't even really get the message. I think you stated it as eloquently as you probably could have, or what they were trying to go for. but it missed its mark. And I thought what they could have done, this would have been cheesy, probably as cheesy as this episode was, but I thought this was going to end up being some sort of like wholesome monkey's paw situation that they actually like.
There's always a monkey's paw.
That they actually did get their wish, but their wish was to be together, or like something stupid like that. It wasn't that. It would have been frankly just as cheesy in my opinion, probably, if it was that. But yeah, I really feel like this missed the mark on making this. This was what was trying to be like a Disney sports film shoved into a 25-minute Twilight Zone with a Twilight Zone twist on it, and it did not work for me at all.
And I actually thought the very ending, Bully has this line about so the kid, I'm going to put it in air quotes here, but the kid like grows up and he's like, I realize there's no magic, Bully. And it's a little bit sad, you know, it's what Bully's been telling him, but it's a little bit sad because the kid has sort of lost his innocence and ability to believe in magic. And Bully has this line about, maybe there is magic and there are wishes, and the problem is there just aren't enough people around to believe. And it was this super, I immediately thought of like all the Christmas movies,
right?
Where it's like, we just need enough people to believe. And this is like the reverse, like the ending Pete is like, there is magic, but there's not enough people who believe in it for it to do anything. Like, right. What a downer, man. Although it's still not as much of a downer as It's a Wonderful Life. So
true.
Got beat that at least.
So one other thought I had on this episode, and then I want to ask you a question from, I was reading on Reddit about
you
the
should
Twilight Zone.
Never read on Reddit, Mike.
I only comment. I don't read anything before. I just make comments out of nowhere. No. So I actually thought that my internet was freezing when Bully's wish actually comes true, because there's a horrible freeze frame. I just wanted to, this was one more critique I wanted to throw out there. I think they could have done a better wish fulfillment sequence than just a freeze frame with Bully essentially switching out for the Italian guy laying on the mat. It was really poorly, I thought, executed, and they could have just done some sort of like filtery thing. They could have kept it in motion. They could have done it a million different ways. I thought they picked just about the worst possible way to convey that this kid's wish was coming true.
Yeah, and we talked about some freeze frames earlier in this season, and that they didn't have the technology at that point to like freeze something and make it look like it was frozen, but time was still passing or whatever, instead of just like, here's a freeze frame of film.
Yeah.
Right. So like, I think the example we talked about before was the Matrix scene where they're doing the training with the woman in the red dress and all the people like are frozen there, but the camera can move around and stuff. And it's clear like things are frozen, not like this is a freeze frame. And they you need the technology to have the grain and stuff moving so it looks like the footage is changing and the people just are frozen. But I agree with you 100%. Like, I think of all the ways you could do this. What I would have done is just, they already established cutting back and forth between the fight and the kid back at home watching on TV, and you have Bully, down on the ground. You have the ref counting. You cut to the kid, and he like makes his wish. Cut back to the ref. He finishes counting 10, and like,
the other
you're
guy.
out. And we cut, and it's the other guy, and that would have been like so much more exciting.
Yeah.
Because they didn't just freeze frame that. They started cutting around to those close-ups of the people in the crowd. And like, now the guy wringing his hands are frozen. But like, a lot of people just sit with their hands together. So you don't even know for sure that it's frozen unless you make that connection back to what was. Yeah, I did not like that.
It was a weird choice.
Can I ask a question about the wish?
Yeah, I definitely will have the answer to it.
Well, the two things I was thinking of references to were Liar, Liar, where the kid wishes his dad can't tell a lie, which is a hilarious movie, and Big, where the kid wishes to be big. And, but, the connection there obviously is two cases where kids make wishes that then actually come true. But in both of those, there's like something specific about why this is going to come true at this time. And, and obviously it's magic. It's, so it's fake, but they like set it up within the world of the film. So, in Big, it's the Zoltar machine and it has to be unplugged and it's magically working somehow. So, something weird's going on. In Liar, Liar, it's like the kid's birthday. He's making his one birthday wish, and that can come true if you really believe or whatever in the, the world of the film. And this one just kind of like, I couldn't tell if it was is it this kid is supposed to have some kind of magical powers, or just anyone who really believes and makes wishes, their wishes would come true, and the problem is just not enough people believe? I wasn't sure, because it felt like too easy that just like, yeah, if you believe in a wish and you wish it, it comes true.
Yeah, I think that that's all it was, though. It did seem like this kid was special because I think that's the reason for his mom's speech about the rent. And speaking of the rent, $15 that she needed to make rent. I also, in the original fight bill that they showed at the beginning of the thing, the seats to that fight were, I think there's $1.75 for a seat and $3 for ringside. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, those were the good old days when you could actually go to things without mortgaging your home. Yeah, I think that was the thought, was that this kid was special.
It does seem like that wasn't the fanciest arena they were at either.
True. Yeah, everyone was too busy wringing their hands for... I do think, though, that the kid, there was something special about the kid, but the message was...
Maybe he had the shine.
Yeah, that could be. That's a good analogy.
Did you think, I would feel bad if those women paid $3 in 1960 prices
to cover their eyes
and then just covered their eyes?
I did have one other thought I realized because I am a Cubs fan, or at least I was a Cubs fan until the Ricketts proved to be the worst ownership that they've ever had. But as a Cubs fan, this kind of hit close to home in a couple of ways, because when the Cubs won in 2016, there were so many things that happened during the 2016 season and during the postseason that just don't happen to Cubs fans. Like, usually they go the other way, and the bad outcome always seemed to happen to the Cubs and the Cubs fans for all that time. And the way they wrote that 2016 playoff run, especially the World Series, I don't think that if you wrote that as a script and pitched it to Hollywood, anyone would believe that it could fly, because it was so surreal and so unrealistic that things were happening. So it did feel like that it was just some ridiculous child's wish that all this stuff had happened. And it was funny when Boley's disbelief kind of unwound it. I am almost paranoid to go back and watch the Blu-rays of that World Series again and again, because I'm like, they're definitely going to win it this time. This isn't going to be the time that they don't win it, because I watched it this way. And there's that little bit of superstitious paranoia in me. And then Ben Zobrist, who was the World Series MVP, one of my favorite utility Cub players that wasn't here long of all time. He was just a great guy, super nice guy. He lived in the neighborhood in the northern suburbs of Chicago. Not northern suburbs, but in Chicago, the north parts of Chicago proper. And Kelsey's sister lived kind of in that area. And Zobrist was apparently just the nicest guy. He would sometimes ride his bike to Wrigley and would just be out and about in the neighborhood. And people would be saying hello to him. Kids would trick or treat at his house. And it fully reminded me of him in that regard, that he was just this super nice guy, part of the community. Zobrist is it was a World Series MVP. He's a great player. I don't know if he'll ever be back now that there's been the layoff, but will have had a storied career and won a few World Series rings. He's a very, very good player. Never one of those household names for baseball players that everyone knows about, even if you don't know baseball. And Boley kind of reminded me of him, or it seemed like he was part of that community, but an approachable part of that community that I thought was kind of neat.
I think that's good analogy. I don't know the player because I don't follow baseball or the Cubs, but from what you're describing, that makes sense. There is kind of a long history of boxing in movies and television, with the boxers being more part of the neighborhood, because it tends to be something you come out of working class. Usually, I'm sure there's exceptions, but the person who was raised with the silver spoon in their mouth and stuff, you don't end up as a boxer. You have better, easier means to success. And there is the thing about them being part of the neighborhood and everyone in the neighborhood rooting for their home person and stuff. And I think less so now. I just don't think boxing has the same sort of cachet as it used to, but I think back in the 60s that might have been more common. I was actually at a couple of years ago at a nearly defunct mall, which has since gone completely defunct. But it had, it was in this weird stage where all the anchor stores had left, all the sort of normal stores you would think of to see at a mall had left, but the structure was still there. And so they're kind of looking for any tenants. So it was this weird mixture of just types of stores and things you normally wouldn't see in a mall. And there was a gym there, And, you know, I say gym, and nowadays we would think of like, oh, it's like a lifestyle or a 24-hour fitness, or like it was the old school, like boxing gym. You could like look in the windows and they were just like punching bags in the ring and like people in there training as boxers. And, you know, I've generally grown up suburban and just never saw that. That was only something from the movies where it's like the boxing gym.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, I guess that exists somewhere. But it felt very weird seeing it, you know, in the 2010s.
They do have like specialty like UFC gyms and stuff now, but those, I think you're right, those are definitely the exception to the rule.
Yeah, and I don't think this is, I mean, I don't know. I didn't go in and like take a lesson, but at this point, I don't think this was like a UFC thing. It really looked like the old school, just like training, you know, boxers.
Did you go in and try and punch a bookie and you hit a wall and broke your fingers, broke all 4 of your knuckles and had to fight? Anyhow,
I did not. I would be I would fail instantaneously as a boxer. Like aside from I can't hit well. I can't take a hit. I can't even balance well. Like even if they just hit me lightly, I'd probably just fall over. I'd get a TKO because I'd trip over my feet 3 times before.
And I would say hitting and taking hits are 2 of the biggest components of boxing.
I would think so. Yeah, those seem pretty important.
Avoiding hits would probably be more important than taking hits, but
I would have to try to do that because I couldn't do items A or B. So, you know, I did think just in terms of worldview, and we've talked about that a lot with Serling and how he views things. And we've seen a lot of Twilight Zone episodes that are pretty dark or take a kind of darkish view of humanity or our situation or like looking at the underside of things. And we've seen some that are more upbeat. But what struck me about this was I think Boley might have been of all the characters we've seen, kind of the particular character, not in terms of the episode's perspective or the writer's perspective, but an actual character with the kind of darkest outlook on life. Like he's pretty bleak. Like there's no magic. The world's just going to rub your face in concrete, you know, and his own view of himself as sort of like over the hill and all these scars and, you know, I'm chasing this bus that left several years ago, like some great lines about it, but this really sort of bleak worldview. And what struck me that as optimistic about this, because I ultimately think of Serling as an optimistic person, because you don't do the sort of preachiness or stuff if you don't believe there's the possibility of things getting better. And it struck me that for all his dark worldview, Boley seems like he puts on a smile for everyone else. He really tries to make everyone else feel good and happy and content. You know, he's acting as a father figure for this kid that he doesn't seem to have any responsibility or official relationship with. He's just like there as a mentor for him. And that struck me as very positive, that somebody who has a sort of negative or dark or bleak view on the world and life in general could still like find positiveness in it. And even after he loses the fight at the end, he's like, you know, we'll go see a hockey game tomorrow. He's still like, first thing when he gets back is like, he's concerned about the kid and making sure the kid's okay.
You know, that makes me rethink Serling casting a black actor for this, because maybe that was more intentional, and I don't know this, but maybe that's more intentional than I was giving him credit for, other than the outside the Twilight Zone social choice of it. Maybe that was the intentional choice of it, because this guy's been fighting, and literally and figuratively fighting an uphill battle his entire life, and it just essentially got beat out of him toward the end of it that he couldn't believe in magic. So maybe there's a bigger statement here, now that I'm saying this out loud, that I wasn't picking up on. This bigger social statement is the fact that we have as a society beat down black people in America as a society for so long that they can't bring themselves to believe in magic or believe in good things in the world. Well, that's a bleak way to end it, but maybe that was an intentional choice by Serling.
You know, that's something I've actually seen in some, not said in that particular way, but in some political commentary going on now, in terms of, you know, when people are talking about winning the black vote, or who African Americans are, you know, supporting in the Democratic presidential primary when that was going on. And one of the things that keeps coming up is obviously different people have their own individual perspectives. And as you know, there's no one racial or ethnic or demographic group that votes entirely as a monolith, but as a overall demographic, that African American voters tend to be a lot more pragmatic and just and don't have the belief in, like, yeah, I might like this, super liberal policy, or I might not, but I don't believe that it would actually be able to happen. I want to go for the, and I wonder if there's a connection there. Yeah.
But we're not a political podcast, so we can't get into it.
Oh, yeah. We forgot to say we're not a political podcast.
So,
missed our line.
Real quick, Mark, I saw on Reddit, and this subreddit for the Twilight Zone, the user, an alien from 1955, asked the question, had started watching the Twilight Zone.
The username is an alien from 1955,
an alien from 1955.
Or it was an alien from 1955.
I don't know. It could be both. Asked the question why, in watching the Twilight Zone on US Netflix, which if you guys want to do and follow along with us is available on US Netflix, why the video quality is so clear for a show shot in 1959. And I thought maybe you could address that, being a film expert.
Well, so first off, I assume everyone's been following along on Netflix, because I do think this would be the most bizarre podcast to listen to if you've never seen these episodes. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said a film expert, because this really is about film and everything being shot on film at that point. And film has a very high resolution, like the actual picture quality it can capture. We can't quite talk about pixels in the same way. Film doesn't have pixels because it's little organic molecules, but actual like celluloid film, you can think of as having just way more, the equivalent of way more pixels than digital video has for a long time. And, I think we get this sense that like old TV and stuff, and maybe even old movies to some extent, look bad because we got, you either only saw them broadcast in like crappy standard definition 1950s quality video, or maybe you saw some of these things on VHS or like rebroadcast on Sci-Fi Network, super compressed, low res, whatever. I guess I shouldn't specifically knock the Sci-Fi Network. There are lots of networks that do that.
We're looking for their sponsorship, Mark.
Whenever I see like reruns of something on TV, like there are a bunch of channels that are just playing old reruns in like super low quality. I'm like, I know these things exist in better quality. Why are you playing this version of it? But anyway, if they have the actual film masters of them, those can be very high quality. I mean, they're better than, even still today in 2020, the highest quality movie image format we have is still film. Like we still haven't even caught up to it with digital.
Oh, wow.
Now today we do have like very high end digital cameras that can do very high resolution and would look just as good as this. They're far better than HD. But, it took us a long time to get there. Even by the 90s, we did not have digital cameras that could do the resolution of film. By the early 2000s, we didn't have digital cameras that could do the resolution of film. I mean, this is really fairly recent. The limiting factor has been, let's say you shot this Twilight Zone episode on film as they were doing. If they still had access to that film and scan it in at high res, I mean, they could probably do 4K scans and they would look great.
Oh, wow.
The issue is for a lot of old TV, they didn't keep all that old film around. So all they might have now is access to like a tape, a recording of the TV broadcast at TV resolution of the time. And those are bad. But yeah, film is a fantastic image medium. I mean, it's really striking when you think about this, over 100 years old technology is still better than anything we've been able to come up with since. Now it's expensive and it has challenges in shooting film that are, I don't want to say bigger or smaller than shooting digital, but it has different challenges. But in terms of just the sheer, like, I want the most detail possible in the picture. I mean, there's a reason filmmakers like Chris Nolan and Quentin Tarantino are still shooting on film and actually trying where they can to get their movies broadcast. Or not broadcast, that's terrible use of the word there. Projected and shown in theaters on film because it looks better.
And maybe this is a bad assumption for me, but I would assume it would also be easier to edit digitally than it would be on film.
Oh yeah, nobody edits on film anymore.
Okay.
I think Michael Kahn, who's Spielberg's editor, was the last major Hollywood person doing that, and he was still doing it basically because he was like Spielberg's editor and had the power to say like, screw it, I'm not learning something new at this point. I'm going to keep cutting on film. I'm like, okay. Yeah. So, the way things work now, so even if you're Christopher Nolan or Quentin Tarantino, you're shooting on film now, and there are other filmmakers shooting on film. I singled those two out because they're kind of the only two who are still really pushing to project movies on film.
And those are recognizable names, obviously.
Right. Well, if you're not a recognizable name, you don't have the clout to get the studio to do it.
Good point.
In terms of clout, you look at Chris Nolan with Tenet, they're sort of talking about like, okay, this is the movie we're going to reopen theaters so we can show Tenet in theaters. That's the level, whether we think that's a good idea or a bad idea, like that's the level of kind of clout he has in the industry. But what you would do is you shoot on film, you get the film transferred to video, or at this point by video, I mean like digital files. Back when I was coming through film school, we'd transfer it to tape, and then you have to like transfer the tape into a computer. You just get a transfer to digital files. You do all the editing with that. And then there's somebody, if you ever watch the credits, and there's a job near the end of the credits called the negative cutter. And their job is to basically take that edited, a list of all the edits that were made digitally, and they go back to the original camera negative and cut and splice together the original camera negative film.
Cool. To
match the digital editing that was done. Yeah, but I think film gets a bad rap because it's like, oh, digital is so cool. And as a technology, it's pretty freaking amazing what film can do, and we still really haven't caught up to it. As a film teacher, I've seen a interesting shift. When I started teaching, HD was new, and we were just starting to get HD cameras that were accessible at the level like schools could get them, because the first HD cameras were like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Is that the Red camera?
No, the Red wasn't out for probably another 6-8 years after that. The very first one in any sort of widespread circulation was Sony's Cinealta camera. That was the one that the Phantom, or parts of the Phantom Menace, and then all of Attack of the Clones were shot on, which I use as references, not because they are good movies, but just that was Attack of the Clones was kind of the first big Hollywood movie actually shot digitally instead of on film.
I didn't know they shot anything in that movie. I thought it was literally all just CGI disaster.
Well, it's you joke about it, but it's that's a movie that it kind of made sense to shoot digitally because the whole movie was going to end up in the computer having digital effects done anyway. I know you are not a big fan of The Matrix, and I am, and I went to see it when they did the 20th anniversary re-release this past fall, and I went to see it in a theater where they were projecting it in 4K. And it was really interesting because some of the shots looked absolutely gorgeous, the ones that had been actually shot on film, which is most of the movie. But then the couple of shots that were like complete CGI, which mainly like some of the things with the spaceships, or not spaceships, but the ships going through the sewers and that sort of stuff that were just CG creations they didn't actually shoot anything for, looked really low res because they had been done in the 90s at like, HD resolution
at the time,
digital effects. And so those are the only masters they have of those are in that HD resolution. But then when they went back to the stuff that was actually on film, they could get a great 4K transfer on it. Where's I going with this?
You were talking about the HD.
Yeah. So when I started, and HD was kind of just being accessible. And what was interesting is at that point, our curriculum was still mostly shooting on film. And all the students would get really excited. They're like, I want to do something in HD, because that was like the new hip thing.
Right.
And now we've hit the reverse, where most of our curriculum's on digital formats because that's what people are shooting, and it's easier for us to get access to. And now there's this sort of cachet of the students like, oh, I want to take the class where we shoot on film, because we do still do some of that. And now that's the exciting thing to them because it's the different thing. And you realize, like, I don't want to generalize all 18 to 22-year-olds, but there's definitely an aspect of like, I don't care what's better. I want to do the thing that's like unique and different that not everyone else is doing. So when everyone else was doing film, I want to do HD. And now that everyone's doing digital, I want to do film.
Yeah. And I want a record player because everything is streaming to my devices. Yeah, I get it.
Right.
Well, thank you. That was super interesting. That's a great, thorough answer that I understood most of.
I like your use of very interesting in the sense of that was way too long and complicated.
No. So, I liked it. I appreciate it. Are we ready for some closing narration and some ratings, Mark?
Yeah. Let's do it.
All right, the closing narration. Mr. Boley Jackson, 183 pounds, who left a second chance lying in a heap on a rosin-spattered canvas at St. Nick's Arena. Mr. Boley Jackson, who shares the most common ailment of all men, the strange and perverse disinclination to believe in a miracle, the kind of miracle to come from the mind of a little boy, perhaps only to be found in the Twilight Zone.
Even when we don't really like the story, like Serling's just got away with words.
Yeah, he's
Second
great.
chance lying in a heap on a rosin-splattered canvas.
Yep. And I think that closing narration maybe gives us a little bit more of a clue that the little boy, that Henry was special, because I feel like come from the mind of a little boy, perhaps only to be found in the Twilight Zone. Maybe that was our clue that it came from the little boy and it wasn't just anyone could do a big tall wish. I don't know.
Maybe. I thought Big Tall Wish was just a cheesy phrase too. Like,
Yeah,
couldn't it just be like the Big Wish or
it wasn't a good episode title, even if
Special Wish? I don't know.
I was not a. Anyhow, let's rank the sweat. He was a boxer.
He was I was going to say, for an episode where he's a boxer, I felt like it actually wasn't that sweaty.
Me too.
4?
Okay, perfect. So I had like a 5, but I'd be down with a 4 because
I'm be down with a 5 too. Anywhere in there is fine.
Okay.
It was not, there was some sweat, but like, yeah, for being, I mean, again, I think back to Raging Bull and like some of those slow motion shots, there's like buckets of sweat coming off the guys as they get hit. I felt like this was not very sweaty for a boxer in a fight.
let's call it a 4 because I agree because it was about apt. And then if you want to, I'm going to let you start our rating.
So I'm not sure where you're going to fall on this one. I know you didn't particularly like it, but I don't think this was like all the way down at a 1.
Uh-oh.
You thought it was a 1. You know, I'll say the whole wish element and stuff I did not like. I think I said at the beginning of the episode, there were some things I really liked in this episode, and there were. And I think they largely come down to Bully and the episode I'm imagining someone would have made where they didn't try to make it into the Twilight Zone and we just followed this boxer because they thought he was such an interesting character and well played, and the dialogue for him I loved. It just didn't all amount to anything in the context they were trying to do here with this weird wish thing thrown in. So I'm going to give this like a 2. Because
Okay.
I liked Bully a lot, and I liked the writing, but the whole thing never really came together or made much sense, and the parts that did come together were super cheesy.
Yeah, okay. Well, we're a lot closer than I thought we were going to be. So one of the other things that bugged me about this and why I do think that this is a 1, but I'd be okay if we split the difference at like a 1.5, is there was so much of just Boley and Henry just arguing, and it was like starting to stress me out. I was like, can you stop just yelling at each? Like there was so much just like, no, you have to believe. No, I don't believe. No, like there was so much of that throughout the episode. I felt like there wasn't a whole lot of progression beyond that. Let me give you a couple. So the only flat out one we have is the fever. Which I think is...
And I will stand on this is better than the fever.
I will agree that I do think that this is better than the fever. We have a surprising number of 1.5s. Escape clause, what you need, the 4 of us are dying, which is another boxing episode, or episode with a boxer. Those are those. And then 2s, we have just a world of difference, it looks like, for 2s.
Did we have some other 2s and we retconned them up or something? I feel
Possibly.
or have we really only just had the 1 2?
We have a couple 2.5s. Yeah, world of difference. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I missed. Mirror Image was also a 2.
Okay.
I like both of those better than this one episode, so I'd be happy with a 1.5 if I can get you to a 1.5.
Yeah, I think I like this about the same as those, but I'd be willing to be talked down to a 1.5.
Okay.
I will stand on this is better than the fever, which remains far and away the worst episode we've seen.
The fever was so dumb.
Imagine if instead of the bookie or the promoter coming in, it had been a slot machine on wheels came in and just said, Bowley.
Bowley. Oh, God. All right, Mark.
Then it would have been a 1.
Are you ready to wrap this one? Oh, no, you're ready to guess next episode?
Oh, I thought I was going to get away without it for once. All right. Yeah, I know my guess from last week on this one was way nowhere at all close.
Well, because this wasn't a Twilight Zone episode. If I showed this to someone, I think this is one of the if I took out the opening and closing, the narrations from Serling, I think this would be one of those episodes. And another reason I think it's a 1, that this is not a Twilight Zone episode. It doesn't feel like a Twilight Zone episode. It doesn't seem like a Twilight Zone episode, but I've said my piece and I've gotten you down to a 1.5.
I think that's correct. I will say if you showed me the took out the opening voiceover, so we don't know it's Twilight Zone. Show me just the opening scene with him like looking in the mirror and talking with Henry and like giving his philosophizing and stuff. I would watch that show.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Okay. You ready for next week's? Mark, it is A Nice Place to Visit.
Okay. So you're going to have something to do with, but I wouldn't want to live there. I will say, let's go with astronauts. We seem to have a lot of those in the Twilight Zone.
Okay.
They fly somewhere and land on a planet. There's aliens, and it seems like some kind of cool society. And one of them makes the decision to stay there instead of going back. But after it's too late for him to change his mind, he finds out there's something about it that he does not like and can't live with.
Are you sure you want to go with land and not Crash Land based on what you've seen of the Twilight Zone so far?
I just assumed Crash was implied when I said astronauts in the Twilight Zone.
Another successful mission of the astronauts of the Twilight Zone.
Any mission you can walk away from, and then he dies.
Well, thank you all for listening. This was Deja Reviewed. As we just said, next week's episode is episode 28 of season 1 of The Twilight Zone, titled A Nice Place to Visit. Feel free to watch along with us and to leave us a rating and a comment wherever you're listening to us. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe. You can find us at DejaReviewed.com, where you can leave us a voicemail, send us a text message, find all of our social media, and we hope that you tune in next week.
Deja Review.